A war of lies. That's how David Sacks talks about in a tweet that has that's been getting a lot of attention in the United States about the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, if you just look at the headline, a lot of people might reflexively think, it's probably that evil Vladimir Putin, because everybody knows everything he says is a lie. Actually, no. Not that Putin doesn't lie. That's not saying anything that's not accurate in that regard. But we're much more focused on the other lies, the lies that are spoken by our side that are harming our interest, that are harming the Ukrainian people's interest, and even the West at large in ways that you may not be aware of. And we are so grateful to have David Sacks with us today to talk about that tweet. I couldn't be more thrilled to have you back on, Dave. David is the co-founder of Craft Ventures and co-host of the All In podcast, which you can certainly check out anywhere you get your podcast and online. Welcome back to the show, first of all, Dave.
Yeah, good to see you. Good to be here again.
So you're in town to give a presentation tonight at a big event here in Washington, D.C. What can you tell us a little bit about what you'll be talking about there and what that event is?
Sure. It's an event sponsored by a group called American Moment, which is a group in D.C. that's committed to foreign policy realism and restraint. I gave a talk on the Ukraine war at their event 2 years ago. And so this is kind of like an update to that, where I'm going to reflect on what we've learned over the last 2 years, and specifically stressing the difference between what we were told at the beginning of the war, the claims that President Biden made, and then what's actually happened.
Man, that is so important, and I'm so grateful that that people are actually looking at that and not just buying all the things that are told. And we're going to get to your tweet here in just a second, but the title really jumped out at me when I saw it, because that's the one you have pinned right now. And by the way, I noticed that at least as of the time we're making this recording here today, it's got over 3 million votes or 3 million views. So that means it is resonating with a lot of people. And I think that that's something that is going to start expanding even more as we keep getting further away and we see the gulf between what is claimed and what is actually happening on the ground. Is that, are you having, what kind of reaction have you had from that tweet so far?
Yeah, this one's gone really viral. Kim.com, who's a pretty big account on X, called it the tweet of the year, which is, from him, is pretty high praise. He certainly is known for posting some bangers. So yeah, this one got pretty viral.
Well, let's hope we can continue to expand on it here too, because I want this message to get through to everybody. One of the reasons we even have the channel here at Daniel Davis Deep Dive is because we want to see the ground truth has to matter, whatever your national policies are. If what you're saying and what's happening on the ground don't line up, then you got to change what you're saying, because the ground ain't going to change based on what you prefer to be the truth. And the reason why that headline resonated with me was so much is because I see the same thing over and over. And I could go on and on about what happened in Afghanistan and all the lies that we told and the disaster that unfolded there for the people of Afghanistan and our own troops and soldiers. But we want to focus on trying to prevent more of that from happening in the Ukraine war. But as I think you're going to point out here, and we're going to read a couple of portions of it, a lot of those costs are already piling up. So it's too late to avoid some of it. But bringing realization and a spotlight to inaccuracies and lies is crucial to getting them stopped. And so I'm grateful for that. Gary, if we can throw that tweet up here, let's just jump right into it. I'm just going to read a couple of parts here right off the bat. The war in Ukraine is based on lies about how it started, how it's going, and how it will end. We are told that Ukraine is winning when in fact it is losing. We're told that the war makes NATO stronger when in fact it is depleting it. We're told that the Ukraine's biggest problem is a lack of funds from the U.S. Congress when in fact the West can't produce enough ammunition, a problem that will take years to fix. We're told that Russia is suffering greater casualties when in fact Ukraine is running out of soldiers, another problem money can't fix. I want to stop right there and talk about that, because the whole issue of money seems to be one of the prevalent themes that so many in the United States are making right now, talking about how we need this money that it's going to have some magic outcome. And there's a great one here, and I'm going to show you this clip here from former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi a few days ago, coming to just this conclusion.
They're fighting for their democracy and fighting for our democracy. We need to send the resources to the Ukraine. And I want the people to know that Russia has been very evil, whether it's kidnapping children, raping women, killing families, and all the rest. But also, their army is bigger now than it was when it went into Ukraine. They are building, using money from people who are escaping sanctions and the rest, and getting help from Iran and from China and other places to build their technology. So we'll win in Ukraine. We must. We have to send the money. We must.
So, first of all, it seems kind of like contradictory that you laid out all these reasons why Ukraine is losing and Russia is winning, and then you just say, but Ukraine's going to win as long as we give them the cash. Is that right, David? Is it an issue of cash for making Ukraine win?
No, I mean, as you and many other people, Professor Mearsheimer, have pointed out, you can print money, but you can't just print more ammunition. I mean, the United States has run out of the key type of ammunition in this war, which is 155 millimeter artillery shells, as well as Patriot air defense missiles and a whole host of other weapons that the Ukrainians would need. And we simply can't produce enough of them. We've depleted our stockpiles. The Ukrainians have used them up. And this message is finally percolating down. Even the Wall Street Journal had an article recently about the shell hunger. This is the new term they've got for what the Ukrainians are experiencing. So we can appropriate more money. We can print more dollars, but you can't just print more ammunition. We just don't have more to give them.
And so let me just kind of back up a little bit and ask you, in this whole thing of a war of lies, what prompted you to write this? Because I read some frustration in this.
Well, I woke up one morning and just thought of this, and I wrote it off quickly, like most of my posts on X, and this one went viral. I guess I was sort of riffing on an idea I've heard from Jeffrey Sachs, the Columbia professor, who talks about how we live in a sea of lies. He was talking not just about the Ukraine war, but just sort of the lies that our military industrial complex and the foreign policy establishment is telling about everything. And so I kind of riffed off that and wrote about this war specifically. I mean, it's an old cliche that, that the first casualty of war is the truth. But I think in this particular case, the Ukraine war, the divergence between reality and the narrative has gotten so great, and it's been so pronounced from the beginning. Like I said, I mean, we've been lied to about how the war started. Of course, we were told it was an unprovoked invasion. Then we find out the CIA has been deeply involved in Ukraine for over a decade, creating what we would see as provocation after provocation. If it was done, the Russians had set up a similar operation in Mexico or somewhere on our border. We backed a coup in 2014 that kind of really started this whole mess. And then, of course, we've been trying to bring Ukraine into NATO, which the Russians have made clear is a red line. So certainly if another country was acting this way towards us, we would see those things as provocations. We have the Monroe Doctrine over here. But we keep pretending like Russia has no legitimate security concerns whatsoever, and Putin just went nuts one day and ordered this invasion for no reason. You don't have to agree with everything Putin has said or done in order to just understand that that's not what happened. I mean, they warned us repeatedly that we were meddling in their, in their near abroad, and we were jeopardizing their security, and they would have to take action if we didn't stop. And we obviously kept persisting in that policy. So there's a whole series of lies about how the war started. And then, of course, there's been lies about how it's going. I mean, they've told us throughout the war that the Ukrainians were winning. We were told in 2022 they had this they successfully repelled the Russian army from Kiev. We then later found out that Putin voluntarily withdrew his troops as a show of good faith because of the negotiations that were happening in Istanbul. Yeah. We were then told that you had this whole narrative about Fortress Bakhmut that was revealed to be a lie when Bakhmut fell. And then, of course, the biggest lie was this narrative about a successful counteroffensive that we would give the Ukrainians what they needed. This is why we appropriated the $130 billion, is that we would give the Ukrainians what they need to repel the Russians and kick them out of Ukraine in the successful counteroffensive. And it was a total disaster. And even after, it was pretty clear, it was clear in the first week that this wasn't going to work. Right. All these new Western tanks, the Leopard 2s and
Challengers.
Yeah, when they ran right into minefields, and it was really clear that the Ukrainians didn't even have an answer to the Russian minefields. They couldn't even get to the first line of defense. They couldn't even get to the Surovikin lines. They couldn't make it through the minefields. And yet the media kept portraying this, well, they're making progress. It's just slower than we thought. And then the Wall Street Journal had that article about how the Ukrainians had penetrated the Surovikin lines. And I mean, it was, they perpetuated this falsehood for 4 months, which actually made the situation much worse for the Ukrainians. If they had simply acknowledged in the first week or two that this counteroffensive wasn't going to work, they could have saved a lot of lives and material, and they would be in much better shape right now. But instead, they just kept plowing ahead. They threw everything they had into this counteroffensive. They used up all of the ammunition stockpiles that we had given them.
Right.
They
That's exactly right.
And that's why they're in such bad shape now. Furthermore, they didn't take the time to build up the defensive lines that they need now to fall back to. And so they're falling back from position to position. They're trying to set up new defensive lines, and you can't do that.
You can't do it on the fly. And that's actually because the Zaluzhny, the commander that Zelensky fired a couple of weeks back, actually made a lot of waves in I think it was as early as October of last year that he did acknowledge and recognize the offensive had failed. And so he didn't want to keep putting good money after bad and good soldiers after bad. He said, we need to switch to the defensive now and start building these defensive lines in anticipation of a Russian counterstrike, which nearly always comes in war. But Zelensky said, no, he's not going to allow him to do that. They wanted to keep on with the fiction, the lies, as you're calling them, that we're on the offensive, and they continued to do that and pay this enormous price at the time in manpower. But now then the real price is coming after Zaluzhny has been fired for allegedly not being successful, and they put in a new guy. Now they don't have defensive lines to fall back to your point. And so now then the real cost of that lie is coming to roost.
Yeah, I think one of the strange dynamics in this war from the beginning has been, again, this divergence between the information war and then the war on the ground. And I think part of the reason for that dynamic has been the fact that Ukraine has no native armaments industry. They don't, without Western support, they wouldn't be able to fight at all. And so Zelensky's main role has been to generate or galvanize Western support. And, one pro-Ukraine commentator called this the Hunger Games war, referring to this dynamic that, in the movie Hunger Games, you have these gladiatorial contestants who have to kind of play to the cameras in order to win gifts from the rich patrons who live in the decadent capital. And so you have this weird dynamic of this sort of gladiatorial sport while they're again playing to the cameras. And I think this is the dynamic in this war, is that Zelensky has had to constantly exaggerate how well the Ukrainians are doing and to sell this vision of victory in order to win the gifts he needs from his rich Western backers.
Funny you should mention that, because he made another one of those pitches just a couple of days ago.
Ukraine's defense industry is not just recovering, it is becoming as productive as it needs to be for a modern, technology-driven warfare. For the next year, we have set ourselves crystal clear goals in terms of artillery, drones, missiles, and armored vehicles. One of our major political results this year is an agreement with our partners, particularly the United States, on co-production of weapons.
Sir, that wasn't the one from a couple of days ago. He said something similar, maybe a day before yesterday, but it's the same version of what's going on here, which is there's no connection to reality to what he's talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the worse they do on the ground, the bigger the lies have to become in order to maintain this, in order to kind of maintain the argument that they need to try and win Western support. And you're right. This is one of the major sources of friction between Zelensky and Zaluzhny. Is Zaluzhny had his doubts about the counteroffensive. He then went public saying that that they were not winning. This was a stalemate, which itself was a falsehood. I mean, it's not a stalemate either. Ukrainians are just losing. They're losing a war of attrition. That'd be the better way to put it.
Yeah.
But the stalemate narrative was a more realistic narrative than the victory narrative that Zelensky was painting. But this is when the rift between them really blew out into the open over this issue, because Zelensky was in Washington when Zaluzhny gave that interview, and he was selling the members of Congress on a victory narrative in order to win more support. And so, this again, the divergence between the military reality and the needs of the information war to kind of constantly put things in a better light than they are in order to keep winning Western gifts. I think this is one of the fundamental dynamics of this war.
And it is. And, you mentioned a second ago that over 2 years, there's been a lot of opportunity and examples of people telling lies. The problem that I have right now is that they haven't stopped at all. Here is Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, being very unequivocal just a few days ago.
Of course, Ukraine can win. Of course, Ukraine has already succeeded militarily in one of the most profound objectives it had, which was to keep the country from falling into Russian hands. It has already done that. And Ukraine can go further in retaking territory that Russia has occupied, but it can only...
That's just one of the more bizarre ones to me, to just say, of course they can win. After all of this 2 years, after all of the utter failure of the offensive and the 200 plus billion that the U.S. and the Western Europe combined gave Ukraine to get ready for that offensive, and it didn't even dent the line. And now then Russia has kicked up their armaments industry into high gear, and they're starting to roll back to the West. In light of all that, you still say, of course they can win. And I'm just like, what planet are you on? Do you think, though, that this is, I guess, still having some relevance to somebody? Do people believe this?
That was one of Jake Sullivan's less convincing performances. But I think that, I mean, he's almost like smiling, like he knows that what he's saying is just kind of a lie. But I think the overriding imperative of the administration right now is just to survive until November, or for Ukraine to survive until November. They do not want Ukraine to collapse before the election. This is their overriding imperative. They do not really care what comes after that. They just want to get to November without an Afghan-style collapse in Ukraine. And so they're willing to say anything, do anything, appropriate, whatever money will help to kind of keep this going until November. And in fact, the order they sent Lieutenant General Aguto to Kiev a few months ago. This was, I think, a news item that should have gotten more attention, is when the rift between Zelensky and Zaluzhny was starting to blow up into public view. They sent Aguto to Kiev, and apparently the article talked about how he's going to be based there with his team. And what were his orders? His orders were to hold and build. This is what they're saying, that somehow they're going to hold together the Ukrainian army and hold the territory they have, and use 2024 as a rebuilding year, and somehow rebuild this Ukrainian army to then go on the offensive in 2025. Well, I mean, that's impossible. The whole strategy is already failing. They're already losing territory, and you're not going to be able to rebuild the military while you're in retreat. Right. But I think the real hold, I think what they really mean by that strategy is, Aguto, you need to hold this thing together until after the election. Get in there and don't let this friction between Zelensky and Zaluzhny cause the whole thing to unravel and fall apart. You got to figure out a way to hold it together until after November. I think that's their central preoccupation.
I'm going to come back to that point in a second, because there's something in the latter half of your tweet that talks about what's going to happen once they do get through it, and then all of a sudden they can't hide it anymore, and the predictable loss does come. I want to touch on that in a second. But in addition to lies, there's also the kind of the bizarre up on Capitol Hill here. I'm going to show you a couple of clips of a couple of senators that are just saying some things that are hard to figure out. It's not even so much a lie as it is, what are you talking about? First of all, we have Mitt Romney, who was on CNN the other day, and was asked about J.D. Vance, who I believe is also at that event you're talking to tonight, who claimed that this $60 billion is not going to actually make any difference on the battlefield anyway, even if they give it. And so they asked Romney what he thinks about that. He said this.
That is an interesting point. It just happens to be as accurate as it is irrelevant. All right. It may not change their stance on the battlefield. What it does do is communicate to the entire world that we honor our commitments and we stand with our friends, and we will help freedom fighters around the world who are our friends and allies. And that's a message which is important to the people in Taiwan, to the people in Japan, to the people in India, to the people in Europe. I mean, all these people are watching to see, can you count on America? Or is America so isolationist, it doesn't care what happens to the rest of us? If that's the case, by the way, if we cede leadership, if we're no longer the leader of the free world, if we're no longer the arsenal of democracy, then the world is going to look for different leaders.
To me, that's just weird to say, yeah,
Right.
I know it probably won't matter on the ground and Ukraine's going to lose anyway. But the message that it sends to Taiwan and Japan, that somehow they're going to get confidence in us if we back a country in a war that we know it's going to lose and we give them money anyway and they lose anyway, but somehow that's going to be better than going, this is stupid, we're going to shut this deal down and find a negotiated settlement. That just doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that one, but yeah, he basically acknowledges the truth that this money will not help the Ukrainians win because we're out of ammo. So that's a stunning acknowledgement by him. I mean, look, if we want to send a message to Taiwan or Japan, just give them the money or give them some of the money. I mean,
Right.
there are more direct
Right.
ways of conveying that message. But actually, I think that, this is a familiar neocon refrain is they're obsessed with our credibility. But if we really cared about our credibility, we wouldn't have gotten over invested in this war anyway. The reason why America is going to have so much egg on our face when this is all over is because we got so deeply involved in Ukraine, and we exposed and laid bare the weakness of our defense industrial base. I mean, it's the fact that we ran out of ammo that jeopardizes our credibility, not whether we're going to print more money to give to Ukraine or not. And Romney can't change that by appropriating another $60 billion. I mean, the only thing I think the money can do is and I think this is one of the reasons why they want it, is they can use it to bribe people to kind of stay in place till November. I mean, I think, we're paying for the entire Ukrainian government at this point. I mean, their economy has collapsed
Right.
as well.
Right.
And so we're paying for their civil service. We're paying for all their officials. So I think that the way they're hoping to hold this thing together is just to kind of pay everybody to stay in place. And that's the only, I think, real function of this money.
And here's the reality of that may play in Kiev and some of these other places. That's not going to have any impact on the front line. And I'm
Right.
not convinced at all that Ukraine can even last through the summer without breaking. We had John Mearsheimer on earlier today. You mentioned that a second ago. He said in there, he thinks that there's a real risk that army just breaks because of the pressures that have put on it and the fact that Russia's just relentless going forward and they have the resources to continue playing, fighting a war of attrition or so. But then staying in the context of things just being kind of strange and not coming to the normal logical conclusion based on the evidence before you, we have Marco Rubio, who had this odd take on it.
There is no way that the Russian Federation takes Ukraine, all of Ukraine, half of Ukraine, and that was Putin's goal from the beginning, was to carve it up into at least half the country, including Kyiv. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. On the other side of it, we have the reality of it is that Ukraine is small compared to Russia in terms of size and its ability to bring scale, its ability to force conscript people. So neither I'm just being honest. And in the past, I have tried not to talk about this publicly because I thought it undermined the leverage that Ukraine had. But now it's the reality. Neither side is going to be able to achieve victory as defined in the most idealistic terms.
Well, first of all, he's half right because Ukraine can't win this. So he gets a little bit of credit for recognizing that. But then he's just, because I think he just doesn't want it to be true that Russia can't win. But there is a lot of evidence that says, no, in fact, they can win. But then in that interview kind of drug on for a while. But then he has this odd comment that we need to still give them the money anyway, almost like Romney does, but for slightly different reason, because then maybe they can later on have a negotiated settlement. But if you're even thinking about a negotiated settlement later, why wait then? Do it now. So again, the logic just doesn't seem to be there among some of our most important leaders.
Yeah. So what Rubio is doing here is known as a retcon. He's retroactively redefining his position, where what he's saying is, well, I knew all along this wasn't going to work. I knew all along that the Ukrainians were hopelessly outmatched, but I didn't want to say anything because I wanted to put them in the best position. Well, if you wanted to put him in the best position to negotiate, we should have taken the deal that was available in Istanbul in the beginning of the war, and the Biden administration sabotaged that. Then you had I think it was September of 2022, Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, came out and said, this is the high water mark for the Ukrainians. This is the best time to negotiate. And he was taken to the woodshed by the Biden administration. No one wanted to listen to that. Where was Marco Rubio then? Why didn't he come out and say then, hey, I think Milley is right, guys. Like, why don't we take his advice? He is your chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He is supposed to be your chief military advisor. Where was Rubio then? He should have said that then.
Yes.
But of course, now he knows better.
Yeah.
He knew all along and just didn't want to say anything.
Yeah, and that leads me to the next thing in your tweet I want to talk about. Gary, if you could bring up that second picture of the tweet. Yeah. You write in here, you said, and then when the war is finally lost, when all these lies have been exposed, the whole country lays in smoldering ruins on a funeral pyre of their own making, the liars will say, well, we tried. Having presented any alternative, having smeared anyone who told the truth as puppets of the enemy, the liars will say, we did our best. We stood up to Putin, but in fact, they will claim we would have succeeded, but for the fifth column of Putin apologists who stabbed the Ukrainians in the back. Do you see some of the seeds of this already playing out now? And I can't imagine anything besides that, because what I can't imagine is any of them going, damn, we were wrong the whole time. So if that's not going to happen, how do you see that part playing out?
Well, neocons always have this Dolchstoß, or stabbed in the back narrative, to explain why all of their harebrained schemes go awry. You saw this after the forever wars in the Middle East, where they said, well, we just didn't stay long enough in Afghanistan. We could have won. That could have turned out right if it was all the people who wanted to leave. They cut and run, that they were the problem. They're the ones who cost us that war. This is what they said about Iraq. This is what they said about Afghanistan. People are still saying this about Vietnam. Like, if we had just stayed longer, if Nixon had been more willing to bomb, I don't know, the North or Laos or Cambodia or something. I mean,
as it was.
They'll never admit it was just a stupid idea to get involved in the first place. So they're going to blame the people who were always opposed to their policy, who warned and advised against their policy and said it was foolish. And they're eventually going to blame those people and say that it was because they gave up hope and they pulled the rug out from under our allies, and they didn't show faith that this scheme went awry. So that's what's going to happen here. And you're right; they'll never take responsibility.
Now, one of my enduring frustrations is after the Afghan war fell apart in August of 2021, which myself and Matt Ho and a number of other people have been mourning for a full decade, was headed towards a loss if we didn't make changes, which we never did, because we kept the lies going then, that things were always on the improvement, that the Afghan government was getting less corrupt, the military was able to stand on their feet, all this nonsense, led by David Petraeus especially. When the thing fell apart, who did the media turn to explain what happened? David Petraeus. And many of the other actual authors of the disaster are now going on there to say why the thing fell apart. Why would they listen to the people who were the architects of the disaster? But I guess that's just part of the nature of the beast here.
Yeah, and I actually think that I heard you talk about this with Professor Mearsheimer about whether Ukraine could suffer a collapse or their military could crumble. I actually think that I'm going to go out on a limb here and just say that I think that we are headed for a collapse. I don't know if it'll happen before the election or not. I think it could happen this summer. I don't know I don't know what form the collapse will take. I don't know if it'll be a toppling of Zelensky's regime in Kiev or whether it'll be a military collapse, but I think there'll be some type of collapse. And the reason I say that is I'm not, the military expert that you or John are, but I have a lot of experience with enterprises that fail, and being a investor in very risky startups and companies. And the difference between an enterprise that sort of fizzles out, kind of fails that way, versus one that has a sudden collapse is the element of delusion. The more delusional the people involved are, the more likely it is to collapse. Because what happens is they don't read all of the data points that are coming at them, and they don't adjust their strategy. And so they run into a wall at 100 miles an hour. There's kind of like a hard reset. And what you really get, what you pick up from, I think, not just American leadership but really Zelensky specifically, is you really get the sense of delusion. And this was the whole focus of that Time magazine story towards the end of last year, where his own aides and advisors said that he was delusional, he had become messianic, there you go. Nobody believes in our victory like I do, but it was his own aides and advisors who were saying, we wish we could get through to this guy. He keeps ordering us to go on suicide missions. He keeps ordering us to take, a few feet every day. That was the time period they should have adjusted. They should have gone completely on the defensive, build up their defensive fortifications. But of course, based on what we know, Zelensky was one of the people trying to get through to Zelensky. He wasn't able to do it. So now Zelensky, who was popular, has been sacked. And like you said, they got the Syrskyi guy. What's Syrskyi's nickname? The Butcher. Now, who is
not
he?
The butcher of Russians, but the butcher of his side.
Right. Exactly. That's what I was about to say. Is he's not known for butchering the other side. He's known as butchering his own side. This is not what you want. I remember when Surovikin was appointed by the Russians, and his nickname was Armageddon. What they were talking about was the carnage he inflicted on the other side. With Syrskyi, he's known for inflicting carnage on his own side. Not what you want. And now he is conducting a purge within the Ukrainian military to try and, I guess, root out elements who are loyal to Zelensky. He's been picked because he's going to be a Zelensky loyalist. So you've got this infighting.
The brigade commanders for failing on the plans that he himself put into effect, which of course even further undercuts any confidence the troops have in the senior leadership as a military man.
Totally, and you see now that Zelensky has allied with Poroshenko and with Klitschko. So there's now like a faction that is kind of out in the open against Zelensky. And now you kind of have people taking sides within the army. So those are not good dynamics. And then at the same time, the Russians are advancing. The Russians keep getting stronger. The Russians keep figuring out new tactics, like you've talked about the glide bombs. The Ukrainians are falling back virtually every day, trying to find a new defensive line. And then that fails. They keep falling back from that. So it feels like we're headed towards some sort of collapse here.
It does. And one of the feeding back into the delusional thing here, and I would be remiss if I didn't put at least one more clip here to get your reaction to, because it's talking about the architect of the failed Afghan war and how Petraeus was the one who was asked to explain why it fell. They're asking him again about this one. And he's saying that we have to win, because if we don't, Putin's coming after us.
Keep in mind that Russia, first of all, would never stop if they achieve their objectives in Ukraine. Moldova, Lithuania, a NATO member would be next.
Just to put an exclamation point on that, you're saying is they would not stop. This they'd be happy if everyone would negotiate and settle for a couple provinces in the Donbass.
This is complete nonsense. He has never stopped. His goal since taking office increasingly has been to reassemble as much of the former Soviet Union or Russian Empire as he can.
We had a show on last week where I explained in detail, using Putin's own words, from 2007 all the way through, that he has never been anything but consistent of saying NATO and Ukraine is a red line for which we'll use force if you press it on us. He has never said anything about wanting to rebuild the Soviet Union. But that's the kind of delusion that Petraeus and those who like him are trying to foist on everybody to make us believe that, oh my God, he's coming after us if Ukraine falls.
Petraeus was one of the chief salesmen for this summer counteroffensive. He said that the Russian lines were brittle. They would start moving in 3 to 5 days, that there's a good chance the Ukrainians would punch through. They would sever the land bridge to Crimea, and then the Russians would have to sue for peace. He said that the Russians weren't motivated to fight. They had incompetent leadership, that there's a significant chance that their army would just would crumble, melt away. All these types of myths have been so refuted. You just wonder, how does this guy have any credibility left?
Well, that's certainly been the question that I've had, and unfortunately, there seems to keep being answers here.
Forget about what happened in the Forever Wars. I mean, you'd think that would have done him in, but
I did. When Afghanistan fell, I thought, okay, now then finally people are going to see that all this nonsense he said forever was gonna expose him for being what he was. But you know, he used a version of what you were talking about just a second ago that you think is coming, and that he said, you know, I had a good plan. If they had just listened to me, we had them on the right azimuth, we had the resources right, but then the administration went away from it, and that's why it fell. And people go, oh, okay. But so I think that you see in the playbook.
It's always that we didn't do enough. You know, we could be in Afghanistan for 20 years, but it wasn't enough. If we just stayed for another 20 years, maybe we could have been successful. We spent dollars in the forever wars. It wasn't enough. Maybe if we had spent 16 trillion, we could have been successful. These guys will never accept responsibility. They only have one mode, which is double down.
They do, and in fact, that's certainly the case still in the White House, and I think that there could be some justification in the belief that they're just trying to get through to hold to the election, because this is Matt Miller. I think this was maybe yesterday or today. What was it? Go ahead and run that one, Gary.
We believe that Ukraine has a plan that they can execute to achieve victories on the battlefield. We've seen them having victories on the battlefield, most recently in the Black Sea, where in the last 24 hours they sunk another Russian ship. So we do believe that they have some surprises in store. We look forward to seeing the results.
Well, they have a plan. So the plan,
the Black Sea is not a battlefield. I mean, it's not a battlefield. It's irrelevant to the war.
The context of the war on the ground.
Right, exactly. That's where the war is taking place. And but by the way, this speaks to the divergence between the information war and the real war, the ground war. And this is why the Ukrainians do things like they focus on sinking a Russian ship here or there, or they send in a convoy to Belgorod, or they'll shell the civilian town square. They'll send drones into Moscow and attack a civilian area. I mean, these attacks are completely irrelevant from a military standpoint, but they allow the Ukrainians to tout a victory to their Western backers that then the mainstream media and then the Biden administration can kind of repeat. And it's all designed to create the perception that they're winning the war, or that winning is a possibility, and therefore we should keep the money flowing.
Yeah, and especially when you see dramatic video like that, one of the ships there. I mean, that's really dramatic, compelling kind of stuff, and it gives people who don't understand what you just described that it's not even on the land and has nothing to do with the battle on the land. But it sounds like, wow, they've knocked out whatever it is, a third of the Black Sea Fleet. Here's another one that goes down. Man, if they keep going, they're going to win the war, which of course is complete nonsense if you have even an elementary understanding of how wars are actually conducted. But yet it seems to keep having traction. So yeah. I just kind of wonder what your thought is about, where this is going next. And I know you're going to be talking on this issue later on tonight here in Washington, D.C. Is there any prospect that enough people are finally starting to catch on to this, that the lies might not have as much traction?
Well, I think that I guess if I had to bet, I think there's a decent chance that the appropriation doesn't go through. I mean, Mike Johnson, the speaker, has done a commendable job standing up to the pressure. I think that the base of the Republican Party is really against this, and the party is certainly almost unanimous that they would rather spend money on U.S. border security than on Ukraine. And I think the Democrats, the Biden administration, really lost an opportunity to cut a deal here, because they turned the border security part of the bill into a mass amnesty. So in any event, just politically, the Biden administration played this in a very bizarre way. So I think there is some chance that the appropriation doesn't go through, but somehow I still feel like it probably will. And then the question is just, do the Ukrainians collapse before the election or not? And I think there's a meaningful chance. I guess I don't. Like I said, I do believe they will collapse eventually, but I just don't know when. We talked about Petraeus. He was the author of the surge in Iraq, right? In 2007, 2008. That didn't work. I mean, it didn't help us win the war, but it did serve one important purpose, which is it allowed Bush and Cheney to slither out of town in 2008 without Iraq collapsing. And it kind of just left the hot mess in the lap of the next administration. And so that once, Obama got us out, the neocons could again run their Dolchstoss playbook and say, well, see, it wasn't W. Bush and us who did this. It was Obama who lost the war. I mean, people didn't really
like when ISIS rose in 2014. That's exactly what they said. If Obama hadn't have pulled those troops out, that would never have happened. And of course, there's no truth to that. And I could go into detail as to why that was, but that is for sure the statements that came out.
Right. So I think what's going on here politically is they want the 61 billion. They're going to use it to try and hold things in place till after the election. That's their goal. Because again, they just don't want to collapse before then. But like we've talked about, it's money is probably not going to be enough here.
Well, yeah, David. I mean, as your tweet points out there, you said several times in there, the problems they have aren't financial problems. It's not money that's going to change this, and it won't change the outcome of the dynamic you're talking about, where the risk is real of the Ukrainian army collapsing with or without $60 billion. That's just the truth of it.
Yeah, but there's a lot of people who really want that 60 billion. This is the last big payday
right,
they're going to see.
It's going to.
They really want that money.
That's really the guys right there. That's the picture. They would love to have that 61 billion for Ukraine security. I mean, for their bottom line. Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean,
there's a lot of that.
The hysteria on X around this has really reached a fever pitch. The reaction to my tweet, is hysterical, and I think it's gotten this way because they're really nervous about this money not coming through, and they really want it. Again, this is the last big money, I think, either way that Congress is going to appropriate in regards to this war. And look, we know that Ukraine has a huge corruption problem. And we this has been well reported. There's a lot of people lining their pockets with the hundreds of billions we're sending over there. So there's a lot of people who really want this money. It's
virtually all of the security assistance that we've provided to Ukraine, that gets invested right here in the United States. That's where it's spent. This is a win-win for us.
We never get tired of playing that one. The war is a win-win. So yay, let's just keep going with it. That's what you need to know right there.
Right, because there's nothing else we could do with that money to invest in the United States, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we couldn't actually help our people, or certainly not provide security for the border, or just not go into further debt. I mean, wait. We should think about doing some things different here. But the irony is that what's lost on so many of these advocates, which I try to point out, but they doesn't ever seem to get any traction in the mainstream, is that even this alleged deal, or let's hold in 2024 so they can go back on the offensive in 25. Guess what that means? That this $60 billion is not only not the end, there's going to have to be a much bigger tranche to come next year, or in the next FY bill to come up. And who's going to be willing to fork over another $100 billion on top of that, and thousands more of our armored vehicles? I don't think there's any appetite in that for America. But without that, the $60 billion doesn't even get the fiction played out.
Right. I think that's an excellent point. And I remember when they appropriated that first 113 billion was the first appropriation. If they had told us that this was the new baseline for a Ukraine appropriation every year in a new forever war, nobody would have supported it. So what they told us is, we just need this money to basically give the Ukrainians what they need for their spring. It was the spring counteroffensive back then,
right?
To evict the Russians from their territory. They said, this is it. This is all we need to win this war. And of course, it didn't go anywhere. And we used up all of the tanks and the equipment and the ammunition. So even if we could recreate that, and it's not clear we can produce it, you're going to need to appropriate another, like you said, a couple $100 billion. And for what purpose? I mean, the Russians have shown that they can thoroughly defeat that offensive.
Absolutely.
So it's not going to work.
Yeah, the reason why the summer offensive didn't work is because Russia has an advantage in the air power. They have an advantage in air defense, which Ukraine can't match. They had certainly an advantage in manpower, and they had a huge advantage in engineering capacity, both offensive and defensive. Ukraine can't match any of those. None of that has changed. None of that is going to change in a generation. It's going to take that much to rebuild and replace what Ukraine has already lost. So it doesn't matter if they got another $100 billion. It can't change the physical dynamics that go into unseating a dug-in enemy defensive force. They just can't do it. So why should we even try? But it's all of these are just reasons why. I know it doesn't. Yeah, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but it's just really frustrating for me.
Yeah, and in the Time magazine, that article, which I think was the first time in the war where I felt like the truth really broke through and started pouring out of a mainstream media publication. There was a Ukrainian official who said to Time magazine, even if the West comes through with all of the weapons that have been promised, we don't have the manpower anymore to use them. So even if we somehow come through with the money and we're able to, I don't know, ramp up our defense industrial base and miraculously and produce a lot more ammunition and armaments quickly, they don't have the manpower anymore to use them.
I actually missed that part of the article.
I mean, it's tragic.
It's true, but I didn't catch that part there.
That was a quote from one of Zelensky's close aides.
Probably doesn't work for him anymore, but a lot of those guys who were his aides earlier now have gone on to elsewhere. But listen, David, we thank you so much for coming on the show today and providing some real clarity here. And I'm really grateful that you're doing everything that you can to get the word out so that people will start listening, so that, number one, we can get the killing and the deaths of Ukrainian people to stop, this pointless slaughter of their own people. And then second, to stop the fiction in the West, in the United States in particular, of trying to claim that something is winning by means of lies to our American people. I hope that the truth is starting to come out, and we really appreciate you putting that truth out there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Danny. Yeah, you're right. It really is a pointless slaughter. It really should stop.
And we'll see what happens here, and we'll certainly keep tracking it for you. And we are thankful for you joining us here at Daniel Davis Deep Dive, where we remain unintimidated and uncompromised, and we will keep bringing you the truth, no matter whether anybody likes it or not, because that's the way it is here at Daniel Davis Deep Dive. And we will see you on the next episode. Thank you.